The games industry appears to be in a significant paradoxical situation at the moment. While a lot of the gaming industry is making more money than ever, we're also seeing massive layoffs that continuously seem to stem from somewhere. Xbox is the most recent company to announce massive layoffs. And while we don't know exactly how many people will be laid off, managers at Xbox have said that they expect massive layoffs in the next few weeks. The big question, of course, is why is this happening? Why, during a period of time where most of these massive AAA studios are announcing insane profits, although some of them are losing money, Ubisoft looking at you at the moment, what is going on? Well, today we're going to be diving exactly into that. Before we go, hit that little like button and also subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get into it. So, according to Kotaku, Microsoft's gaming business is seemingly in for another round of mass layoffs. The fresh cuts would be coming just as Xbox seems to be in full retreat from its long-standing console hardware business as it invests more in Windows gaming and bringing first-party exclusives to PlayStation 5. Now, they're going to make this out to be one of the reasons for the layoffs. And a lot of Microsoft or Xbox fans have expressed similar opinions. They don't like that Microsoft is walking away from the console war and seemingly focusing a hell of a lot more on gaming. But when we start to look at gaming trends and specifically gaming industry reports, I think Microsoft is on the right track. If we look at this chart, it shows you that mobile gaming is absolutely dominating the market. But that's for a whole bunch of reasons, and none of those reasons will help PC or console in any way, shape, or form. Mobile is targeted towards an audience that simply will not play console or PC games, and therefore they're not an audience that either console or PC should be trying to foster. Instead, we need to look at the red line on this chart, where consoles seemingly is in a period of massive stagnation. Ever since 2021, consoles have not really grown at all, and in 2024, we're seeing a decline in the overall revenue market. I would like to point out that this red line does not just consist of PlayStations and Xbox, but it also includes things like the Nintendo Switch. It includes things like the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally and all of the other handhelds that are very quickly starting to come to market. I would argue that this is a misrepresentation of the data. While, yes, the ROG Ally and the Xbox handheld and the Steam Deck are technically consoles, they're far closer to PC than what they are to their console brethren. If anything, I would call them portable PCs, considering they open the market for all games to be played, not just console games. Because they are Windows compatible, you might actually start to count those as part of the PC market. Not to mention that PC is the one that is actually growing in 2024. And this means that if we moved the console handheld or the handheld consoles over to the PC market, we could probably start to see the PC market overtake the console market. This is exactly why I think Xbox is doing the right thing. See, I believe that handhelds will replace consoles within the next 10 years. The handheld market offers just way more utility. I think Xbox is taking a page out of history here and learning before they become irrelevant. History is filled with companies that were too slow to adapt to a changing landscape. We can look at companies like Kodak, for example, who in 1975 invented the digital camera but refused to switch because, hey, we don't want to kill our film business. Blockbuster was another company that refused to adapt and ultimately went the way of the dodo bird. BlackBerry, Nokia. Fundamentally, there's so many more examples of exactly this. You have to be able to adapt. And I think Sony is going to find itself at the tail end of this sort of reluctance to adapt to a changing landscape. But none of this, of course, speaks to why Xbox is laying off a bunch of people. None of this explains it, because Xbox is working on their first handheld. The consoles is not selling well. The console market is still worth around 50 to 60 billion US dollars. So clearly that's not the issue. Well, going back to the Kotaku article, the recent bloodletting began at Microsoft in January 2024 with nearly 2,000 layoffs across Bethesda, Xbox, and Activision Blizzard. Studio closures at Tango Gamesworks, Arcane Austin, and others followed in May. Another 650 layoffs occurred in September. While Microsoft claimed that no games were cancelled, in that most recent round of layoffs, developers at studios like State of Decay 3, Maker, Undead Labs were impacted. A lot of other cuts happened, but this is what Phil Spencer had to say about the layoffs, and specifically asked about this because Xbox is incredibly profitable. He said, "We're accountable to Microsoft for running a good business, a healthy business that continues to grow at both top line and bottom line. That's kind of a foundation for us. And what that does is it allows us to continue to invest in Xbox for our community of players and creators, and that's what we're doing. It does mean we have to make trade-offs through the year on things that we're going to invest more in, things that we're not going to invest as much in because it is kind of we are the business that we are." You see, this is the uncomfortable reality with business. You still have to be profitable because fundamentally, a business that tries to do nice things will not survive if it's not being profitable. So you can try and be as nice as possible, but you still have to make the money. Now, of course, Xbox is trying to counter all of this by also increasing game prices. All of this is done specifically to push people towards the Xbox Game Pass, which is another beast altogether. But let's talk about what Kotaku refuses to mention, the elephant in the room. Through the entire article, Kotaku not once speaks about the failures of the games that Microsoft has been releasing as of late. When we look, for example, at Stalker 2, we find that Stalker 2 is not doing well. It didn't do well at its launch, and it's not doing well now. Now, it failed for a number of reasons, and wokeness and DI was not necessarily a part of that, but it was incredibly unplayable at the launch of the game. Microsoft Flight Simulator, also not doing all that well. Indiana Jones, another game released, a lot of money pumped into it, did not reach any real fame with players. Call of Duty, perhaps the biggest game that Microsoft has in its banner, is doing ridiculously badly. And this is important because Call of Duty's whole business model is pushing battle passes and microtransactions. So when you have fewer players playing, and at this point it's less than 70,000, 66,000 to be specific, that they're getting in 24-hour peaks, that's really, really bad. And as you can see on this line, it's still going down. Look at Avowed, for example, could not reach anything. Now you might say, but Acklon, hold on, that's just Steam charts. That doesn't say anything about what is actually happening here, and you're absolutely correct. It doesn't. For this, we have to look at Microsoft's Xbox Game Pass, the service that has currently 34 million subscribers actively as of 2024. Sadly, we don't have any more up-to-date numbers than that. Now, if we look at, for example, the Game Pass, and we look at 34 million, that's a lot of money. I asked Grok to just do a conservative estimation of how much money Microsoft makes out of the Xbox Game Pass. And being as conservative as possible, it comes out to $6.1 to $7.1 billion annually. That is a lot of money. But consider the size of Microsoft. Consider the size of Xbox. Consider the size of the studios that Xbox acquired. Now consider the amount of money that Xbox pays annually to video games. I would not be surprised if this number amounts to anywhere from 1 to 2 billion US dollars. Now consider the constant failures of these games, with Call of Duty perhaps being the most notable one. And you can see that the people over at Activision are getting desperate. They're constantly pushing battle passes and collabs with people like Seth Rogen, for example, releasing a bunch of marijuana-filled nonsense. And you also have their sort of new push to try and get women into Call of Duty that is just consistently failing. You see, all of that money, that $7 billion, doesn't help when you're consistently losing money on the games that you release. I didn't even look at stuff like South of Midnight, which, again, it might not be that they're spending $200 or $200 million on that game specifically, but all of those games put together will come out to a relatively pricey endeavor. and none of these games are working. And this is the fundamental flaw of modern day gaming. This is why we're going to see a lot more layoffs happening at companies like Xbox, at companies like Microsoft. You see, because Microsoft is one of the few studios that when President Trump announced that DEI is over, they doubled down. And we're now seeing these effects take hold every single time. There is not a single movie or video game that you can point to in the last 2 years that have been infected by DEI that isn't just getting destroyed as a result of wokeness and DEI. Now, no one is saying that wokeness and DEI are the only things to blame for the failures of these games, although one must argue and must remember that wokeness and DEI doesn't just speak to the result or the product, but also to the people who actually end up making these products. When you have a bunch of people that got their jobs not because they were the best for the job, but because they happen to be the right gender, culture, or color, that will definitely affect how good your game is. And fundamentally, this is a joke, but it's a bad joke. And it's a joke that's about to get a lot worse. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, hit the like if you liked, the dislike if you didn't, and I'll see all of you in the next one. Thank you.